Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, a shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And my guest today is Amanda Wilkie. Amanda, I'm glad to be seeing you and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jon. Always happy to be here.
All right, we have a fun topic today, the topic of metrics, but more importantly, powerful metrics to track from a client's perspective. Now, Amanda, you've been working with firms, you've worked in firms before. You know that we love our metrics, but are we always tracking the right thing? And so my first question for you, Amanda, is why is it important for firms to track metrics, not from their perspective, but from a client's perspective?
Yeah. Well, and Jon, I've got to start by giving a shout out to our colleague, Ariana Campbell. I knew that we had this podcast coming up, and she just wrote this great article. It came out in the Boomer Bulletin about metrics. And so it is something that's very important. We talk about a lot of the time. So with her permission, I told her that I was actually going to take some of the content out of that article. But I know that you'll actually put a link to that article in the podcast when you post it. So I would encourage everyone who listens to dive in a little bit deeper and check out Ariana's article there. But I think it's very important, Jon, like you said, we're always talking about metrics. We're always trying to, find the data and the insights that's going to help us run our firms better and help us actually serve our clients better. But Jon, typically accounting firms, they track things that don't always really resonate to their clients. Like, your clients don't necessarily care about realization. And that's the big one. I've heard my entire career in public accounting is, all about realization and trying to improve realization. Your clients don't care. They don't care about your realization. They don't care about things like utilization. And, we always hear things like chargeable versus non-chargeable hours and, ratio of staff to equity partner. Jon, have you ever heard a client ask a firm, what is your ratio of staff to equity partner?
It has never been a part of the conversation I've been a part of.
Yeah. So how do you know that you are providing value from the client's perspective if you're not tracking the things that clients care about? If you're just tracking the things that the partners care about, then you're not really doing, you're doing a disservice, and you're missing the opportunity to serve your clients better.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I bet, Amanda, there's many people listening to this right now thinking, okay, now that I hear Amanda walk us through that does make a lot of sense. Why are we not tracking information from a client's perspective, things that they actually care about that make a difference to them and their experience working with us? So it sounds so obvious when you say it. So my next question for you, Amanda, is, so what are some examples of those metrics that firms should be tracking? You shared metrics, kind of the common ones, right? Mm-hmm. That firms historically have tracked. And in some ways, it's just kind of, a nice blanket for some of these firms to keep holding on to tracking those old metrics. But what are some client-centric metrics firms should really consider tracking?
Yeah, Jon. So those chargeable versus non-chargeable, the realization, utilization, those all really show you how your firm is performing. So again, those are great to track for internal purposes. Again, for the people who care how your firm is actually doing. When you're talking about really the client focus, and this came from a great article, Ariana shared it with us from the Harvard Business Review, where Gene Kornfield actually talked about some of these, what he called the customer performance indicators. So we're very familiar with those key performance indicators. So those, again, the KPIs are the metrics that we're tracking to show how our business is actually doing, how the firm's business is actually doing. But those customer performance indicators, those CPIs, are a little bit different. And some of those include, when it comes to an accounting firm, looking at the average number of services per client. So from the firm's perspective, this can be useful. It's a great metrics because it's more cost effective to introduce new services to existing clients. I mean, Jon, with your background in business development, I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes, there's so much growth opportunity within existing clients that firms are just really not paying attention to.
Yeah, exactly. So being able to track that average number of services per client, again, it helps you understand, where some of that opportunity is, and the services that your clients are actually valuing as well. So you'll understand better that entire, spectrum of the client's needs and wants for your firm. Another that we hear about is the lifetime value of the client. We track revenues, we track revenue per client all the time, but that whole lifetime value, so revenues for new clients, aren't enough to track, because if you are attracting new clients, but your old clients are actually leaving the firm, if they're going somewhere else, then you have, you're losing some opportunity there. So tracking that lifetime value of the client will show how long clients have been with your firm and whether or not they are picking up those new services, whether or not they value those new services as the relationship between that client and the firm really goes on. A couple others that we hear, the Net Promoter Score. So your NPS, that's, a client satisfaction benchmark. Again, it's an excellent indicator of how the clients really perceive the value that your firm is bringing to them. And then the last one I will mention is work turnover, or sometimes when Ariana and I are working with firms on process improvement, we'll call it cycle time as well. So that's measuring the number of days it takes to actually complete the engagement. So from the first time we get information or data from the client, how long does it actually take us to get the tax return out the door, get the financial statements out the door? How long does it actually take us to finish that engagement? Because our clients do value efficiency, and being able to show that we have a low work turnover or a low cycle time, that can help measure that client satisfaction as well. Because again, they want that work, they want that deliverable, as fast and as efficiently as possible. So Jon, those are the ones I would recommend.
Yeah, those are really great, Amanda. And, sometimes when you get into the topic of metrics, metrics end up being tracked that you really can't do anything with. Like, oh, that's an interesting number, that's an interesting metric, but what kind of conversation can we really have around that, or how is that really beneficial? What I love about the examples you just gave is we could do a podcast on each one of those separately. And there's a whole round of questions and strategy and tactics that could be applied around those metrics, and what you do with them, which leads me to my next question, Amanda. Of the firms that you've worked with and have seen that are tracking these types of metrics, what conversations are happening in their firm? What type of results are they seeing? How have you seen firms benefit from tracking these metrics?
Yeah. Well, and Jon, I think part of it goes back to, again, being able to have those conversations with your clients, not internally, but these metrics help you have conversations with your clients, whether it is introducing that new service, doing a cross sell, having that average number of services per client, that's going to help you with those conversations. It's going to help you identify opportunity from a sales and a business development standpoint. I think also the work turnover or that cycle time helps you identify areas where you can add some efficiency into your processes, or maybe there's not efficiency and you need to build that into the process. It also helps you identify, especially if you have year over year, and can help you identify where some of those bottlenecks are during your busiest time, so that you can adjust and clear out those bottlenecks as well. So again, these are the metrics that allow you to have better conversations. Again, even that work turnover metrics, being able to have a conversation and clearly set expectations of when the work is going to be done, that gives you a great opportunity to have a conversation with your client about what their expectations are. You can manage those better. And then meeting those expectations, that's going to improve that net promoter score and things like that as well.
No, those are great. So one question we always ask on this podcast, or at least most of the time, is, hey, how is this topic relate or important or impacting kind of organizations outside the accounting profession? So I want to pose that question to you, but I think I might add an additional question to that, or maybe you can answer the hybrid of this is, the accounting profession is big. And it consists of more than just accounting firms, right? You got vendors, you got consultants, you have kind of a whole ecosystem around that. How is this topic around tracking metrics from a client perspective kind of impacting those other areas outside of just a traditional firm?
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it, John. I'll go back to realization. Again, that's something that we as a professional services industry, if you will, professional services profession sounds a little redundant, but we look at realization. Our software vendors, they don't look at realization, but they do look at that net promoter score. They look at, the average number of services per client. So being client centric is not unique to the public accounting profession. So whether it is a software vendor, a consulting group, an accounting firm, a law firm, any organization out there, they really should be looking at how they can be more client centric. So, what services or features are their clients willing to pay for? What's the firm spending money on that maybe the clients don't value, or where are we spending our time that possibly the clients don't value? And being more client centric is going to help improve those things for any organization, an accounting firm or otherwise.
That is really, real insightful. So, Amanda, as we kind of conclude this episode, hopefully our listeners are thinking, you know what, there are other metrics we should be tracking that are more client centric. They have a lot of good ideas off the ones you listed. And maybe they're kind of raring to go, right? Maybe they're driving to the office right now and they're thinking, I want to have conversations with my people when I get there. What are some recommendations of next steps you have for our listeners?
Yeah, and Ariana and I have this conversation quite often with firms as well. There's really only one way to find out what your clients value, and that's by actually talking to your clients. So I would say that that's kind of the next step, is talk to your clients and find out what they are, what they do value, and maybe what are some of the things you're doing that they don't necessarily value. That's really going to help, again, build that relationship so that your firm can be more client centric.
Great advice, Amanda. Well, Amanda, that concludes our time for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you so much for taking the time for being on.
Always happy to be here, John.
And for our listeners, if you like these topics, please subscribe to our podcast. We release new episodes every Tuesday morning, and we like to switch up the topics. One week it might be process, next week it might be technology or leadership or growth or talent. But we are always releasing episodes, new episodes every Tuesday morning. So please subscribe. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, John.